Nice. Hello, everybody. It's me again. It's Madison. Yeah. Again, my name is Madison Scott Clary, or Makio, or Maddie, and I am an author and editor and nerd living up in the Pacific Northwest. My pronouns are she and her. And today I will be reading a selection from my book Qoheleth, which just came out a couple days ago. It came out on the 1st, with this lovely cover by Iris J, who is absolutely delightful. This is my first real big attempt at science fiction. So it's still very Maddie, but I hope that you enjoy. I will be reading a little bit of a selection from the beginning. And as you know, I'm not going to spoil any of the book, but the basic premise is that far future-ish, medium future of 2112, people have the immersive net technology, but then there's a slight risk of getting lost, where you wind up getting stuck in the online world wherever you are, then a second thread of the story. About 100 and some odd years after that, or 200 some odd years after that, the ramifications of that, leading to sort of the mind uploading and everything, are sort of coming back to haunt people. So I am going to start streaming my screen and get the cover up here. And so this is Qoheleth. It is one of 2 novellas in this book. After I'm finished reading, I'll give away a few copies. I've got a couple copies of the did I just stop streaming? Oh, okay. A couple copies of the paperback and some copies of the ebook. So, without further ado, Qoheleth. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. Ecclesiastes 3:15. R.J. Brewster, 2112. The theater purred. It hummed to itself. It stretched and reclined. It relaxed, unwound. R.J. in the room let out a slow, long-held breath together, feeling muscles and wires relax. Nerves and current disentangle themselves slowly. All right, everyone, it's midnight. Time to start packing up, Johansson was saying from the front row. Ross, we're short one. Can you start pulling together all of the mics? RJ will help you get them sorted. RJ offered through the sound system. It was busy putting the theater to bed and couldn't spare more than a meager few syllables to the rest of the cast and crew. Get a headset, Ross, so I don't have to talk through the speakers. Those speakers were signing off, going to bed one by one through RJ's gentle ministrations. The physical backup board set about the task of returning to neutral as RJ worked. All of the gain knobs orienting themselves, then all of the monitor knobs and the sliders, the whole system ticking through the automated checklists as it cooled down. All minus the channel it'd need to keep open to Ross. Hey boss, got a headset. Where do you want me to start? Grab the leads first, RJ murmured. Then Sarah and Catherine. They've got the nice mics. All of them should have a tiny number painted on the costume side that matches with their box. The boxes are stacked in the pit by the front wall. You should be able to get them out in one load, but be careful taking them back. Got it. Heading down to the pit now. RJ left the channel open just in case. The soft sounds of breathing and the occasional curse as Ross bumped his head on the pit cover were distracting while I set about going through our notes with the dozy theater. Best to be available, though. The next night's rehearsal was the last before they went live. He knew the show better than most of the cast. I'm in the theater. The 2 had to learn everyone's lines, plus a few cues besides, where they'd have to take care not to pick up any of the sound effects, gunshots, chairs scraping, a scuffle, the clap of heels on the matte black stage itself. The theater's job was simply to work with RJ and the lighting crew, responding to their knowledge of what was going on in the play, while RJ and Caitlin's job, as sound and lights respectively, was to respond to the stage manager's encyclopedic knowledge of the play, her view of the house. All sound was under RJ's jurisdiction, cast and crew both. He spent as much time managing communication between the hands and the manager, and himself and Caitlin, as they did managing the sound from the performers. Private jokes kept on the down low. They had to be ghosts in this, even the theater. Their jobs were ones that should be invisible to the audience, because it would only become visible if they fucked up, and no one wanted to fuck up. Even the theater seemed to feel a sense of pride in doing its job, and doing it well. RJ soothed the room with gentle cooing and reluctantly started the process of pulling back. He closed the channel with Ross and put all the headsets to bed last of all, before he slipped back from the interface, felt for that cool breeze of reality on the back of her neck, or whatever passed for a neck so immersed, and backed out. Blinked as they adjusted to seeing the cavernous hall with her own eyes, lifted her fingers, slipped down from the contact points, and leaned back from the headrest. He shook her head to clear it and stood, stretching before ambling from the tech booth down the stairs toward the stage, letting gravity carry her lanky form down 2 steps at a time. Breeze against her face, the treble note of dust and conditioned air only added to the newborn feeling of pulling back. Ross was in the front row, standing still and staring at the floor, muttering agitated questions into the headset. "Hey, Ross, I'm here. How's the sleeping now?" Ross jumped, then looked embarrassed as he tugged the headset off his head. "Sorry, I was wondering where you'd gone. I just heard a beep." "Yep, signing off from above. Did you get all the mics gathered up?" "Oh, yeah, that's what I was trying to tell you. I wasn't sure what to do next." It only took a few moments for RJ and Ross to get the last of the sound gear settled. Headsets from all the hands socketed into numbered chargers on the wall. Everything would sleep tight until the next night on Sound's End. Caitlin and Sarai, the stage manager, joined them with the rest of the crew. They sat on the edge of the pit cover, unwinding from the tenseness of rehearsal. The actors were slow to get out of their half-costume and clump together on the stage. "Gather round, children," a voice boomed out from the darkened audience. "Yes, Mr. Johansson," one of the actors sing-songed back. Tired laughter. "Good job. I think we're there. Still, a bit more polish never hurts. No flubbed lines and mostly relaxed, but Sarah, you gotta loosen up. It's not Shakespeare, you can chill out. Crew, you guys got a little sluggish toward the end. I know it's late, but so are our shows. Don't work yourselves too hard, but keep on top of things, okay?" RJ, Sarai, and Caitlin murmured their assent. I lost my line. Okay. "Tomorrow night, back here at 4. "Early," RJ murmured. "How come?" Johansson grinned. "There's a school production that winds up around then, and I want you all back here to make sure we still have a theater." There was a bit more grumbling, but RJ knew they'd be there on time. It wasn't too much of a stretch. Those with second jobs would make it. "Back to base, then. Get some rest tonight, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Remember, you can drink tonight, but tomorrow, das ist streng verboten." The troupe laughed and started to disperse. The tech leads lingering on the pit cover for a little while longer as they reoriented themselves to the real world, a world bound by spatial constraints, limited by 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands. Eventually, RJ made her way out into the chill of the street, pulling on her thin waterproof gloves to keep the contacts on the middle joints of her fingers clean and dry. Midnight on a weekday, and not much going on. People visiting the pubs to catch up with their friends after work. Black cabs, night buses. The idea of a warm pub and a quick pint before heading home tugged at him, but the pull of home was much stronger than that of beer. There would be a pub of a different sort waiting for him. They trudged instead up to Oxfurred Circus, central line to Bentham Green, walked the few blocks from there to her flat, stopped to pick up a takeaway carton of curry and rice from one of the more trustworthy shops along the way. Once home, he slipped out of her jacket and welcomed the warmth of her little flat after the damp chill of London outside. Her cat trotted up to them. I keep losing my spot. Her cat trotted up to him, twining around her ankles, a little ginger thing of a few years they had rescued from a friend who was moving deeper into the city. She was the only one to share her space with him after the last flatmate had left for somewhere cheaper. "Hey, Prissa, let me put my shit down before I get you food." A meow, indignant, followed him to the kitchen. He set her takeaway on the counter and scooped up a cup of dry food into a fresh dish, setting it on the tile for the delicate cat. Indignant meows replaced by purring and crunching. He thumbed through her phone to start the music playing, some of the stuff that reminded him of her dad to go along with the curry that reminded him of her mom. Quiet, but present. Dinner was no more or less exciting than usual. RJ ate alone at the kitchen table with the carton spread out before him, bearing orange curry and the soggy samosa that had come with it. He left her gloves on just to be sure. No sense in having to clean her contacts more than he'd already need to after a long rehearsal. He finished, scooped the last of the curry into a plastic container for the next day's lunch, promising himself that he'd cook an additional pot of rice before heading out in the afternoon, so he'd have more calories to keep himself running. Cleanup, as easy as tossing the container into the compost bin along with all the others. Cooking much more than rice was for times other than crunch. The rig in the corner of her bedroom was exerting subtle gravities on RJ. As they ran through the motions of post-recital evening, eating, cleaning, storing leftovers, using the toilet, her orbits grew smaller and smaller. Her gloves were itching. They could feel the phantom breezes brushing past phantom fur. Phantom fur. Phantom ears, phantom tail. Phantom realities teased around the edges of her perception. He finally allowed himself to sit down at her rig, relaxing into the familiar curves of the chair. Even with the draw so close to him, he took her time. He picked up Priscilla and stroked her smoothly from ears to tail a few times until she started purring up a storm, informing her that, in fact, she was the prettiest kitty. Peel your gloves off one finger at a time, he thought. Relish the anticipation. Get caught up in it. Hell, let it linger. Cat settled into her lap and curled into a small crescent. They set about cleaning the contacts on her hands with lint-free paper and rubbing alcohol. Those done, they wiped down the headset, removing the negligible residue of sweat and skin oils that had collected there. Clean enough as it is, they had recently replaced it. Soft padded headrest where her forehead would lay. Her gear at home was more elaborate than the stuff at the tech booth at work. Her gear at home was more elaborate than the stuff in the tech booth at work they shared with Sarai and Caitlin. They had drained her savings to acquire it. The rig, as well as the contacts on her fingers, the interferites, nanoscale implants that took over her optic and auditory nerves, and the electroparalytics to keep them from acting out in reality what took place online. The NFC connections implanted under her hairline and their ramifying tendrils, all of that painful work down her spine that helped him more fully experience the connection. All worth it. Connections and gear cleaned, RJ finally felt complete enough to pop open the lid on her rig. The screen, all but vestigial when I was inside, still served its role during boot and login. He quickly keyed in her passphrase, then rested her right hand on the curved pad, fingers finding familiar grooves that held her hand in place. The connection from her contacts with the other half of her 2 factors of authentication. Gonna head in, Prissa, I murmured to her cat, stroking over her ears, fingering the soft velveteen folds until she shook her head away. Sorry, dog's heading outside. Purrs, nevertheless, ratcheted up a notch. I'll be back in a bit. I set her left hand into the cradle, tilting her head against the headrest, feeling the comforting touch of cool microfiber and a little twinge of recognition from the NFC controllers. I nudged the button beneath her thumb. The rig went immersive. As RJ delved in, the soft hum of a cooling fan picked up to handle the waste heat of countless computations. I could no longer hear it. Ade sat up in bed and slid to the edge of the mattress, stretched languidly, let fur bristle from ear to tail, the latter bottle-brushing out. He shook himself to settle the fur back down and yawned widely, slender pink tongue curling just shy of sharp incisors. All formalities, to be sure, or perhaps wordless mnemonics to finish the context shift, the final step in a ritual. All those phantom realities clicking into place. Brushing her fur down, the Fennec stood and padded to the dresser in the corner of the room, pulling out a thin cotton shirt with laces up the front and a simple navy sarong, which he tied around her waist. Countless hours examining some of the highest fashions out there on the net, and he'd come to the conclusion that, in these times of excess, the understated said the most. It interfered with the fur the least, worked well with a tail, a simple slit cut down the length of the sarong let that slip free, and it was cheap. There was no shortage of ways to spend money, and Ade had better things to buy with what was left after London rent. Better to perfect the form, to make it fit more precisely our self-image. A handful of silver, paltry exchange for building the you are meant to be, rather than the you are. He swiped her paw from left to right atop the dresser, revealing a dimly glowing arsenal of personal belongings. It'd be a simple night out, so I tucked a few V-cards, a limited credit chip into a shoulder bag, and hauled the strap over her head. vulpine ears laying flat, out of the way. From there, claws clacked against the glossy surface of the teapot pad. Gauche as it was to pop in and out of existence where folks could see, it kept airs in the corner of the studio apartment rather than the alcove. The feeling of exposure and the jarring change of scenery was titillating, racy. He stood straight on the pad, gestured a paw from left to right, bringing up a list of recently used commands. Had I left fingerprints online, there'd be a clear smudge over one entry. He rarely did anything else on work nights. Teaport, the Crown Pub. Tapped, and the obligatory click that went along with the change of scenery brought him into an alcove paneled in oak, lit by green glass-shaded lights hanging pendulous from a cord directly above him. To adjust to the comparatively dim light, the pub sim largely following the circadian rhythm of the British Isles was just as dark as it was for RJ back in London as it was, but our personal sim lived in a perpetual 11 a.m. springtime. I turned and stepped away from the pad, narrowly avoiding a slender weasel stumbling toward the alcove. "See ya, Debar," Aude said, though it came out more like "Shia, Debar," coming from the fox's narrow muzzle. I got a curt grunt from the weasel done up all in black. Sorry, it's dog time. The fox shrugged and headed into the pub proper, nose twitching. The sense of the room told him more of those present than simply scanning the crowd. One or two gawking entities with no scent property set, tourists, and the usual crowd of aromas. Friends, mostly. Acquaintances, all. Whiskers bristled at the distinct whiff of dandelions. A memory left over from youth, and I made a beeline toward one of the window tables where the scent originated, skirting around bodies of diverse shape. Cha-cha. "Come on, Fox, loosen your filters, won't you?" Sasha laughed, scooting her chair back to stand up and lean in for a quick hug. Aude slipped her arms around the skunk's waist in turn and gave a squeeze, tail a swish. "Lame," I drawled, but dialed the output filters back on her speech, letting something more closely resembling English pass. "How you been, skunk?" "Oh, you know, same old, same old." Sasha settled back into her chair, fiddled with a stack of V-cards on the table, giving an outsized shrug. Been kind of boring in here over the last few days, so it's good to see you." The fox nodded, tugging her shirt straight and moving over to the chair opposite the skunk, sliding into it easily and resting against the back. "It's late there, isn't it?" "It's late there. Not too late. Won something. Made it home in good time, at least. Rehearsal ran late." Sasha grinned. "You know, every time you talk about rehearsal and such, I just think back to school. You hunched over the sound booth, you know? It's hard for me to picture you as having grown up and taken that as a job." Ade adopted a look of mock despair. "Isn't it? I went to uni for it and everything, but hey, London ain't bad. I can't complain any. Besides, not like you left it either." The skunk rolled her eyes and leaned forward onto her elbows, muzzle resting on obsidian paws. "Tell me about it. You're missing out big time here in the burbs, dear. You could be teaching high school theater in any town along the Central Corridor, doing the same plays once every 5 years so no students repeat them. Truly, a life of glamour." Sasha laughed when Ade buried her face in her paws and groaned. "Seriously, though, you just remind me a lot of school. Maybe it's because of all the ways you haven't grown up." "Please, Sasha," Ade poked her tongue out, "if you bring up dating—" "Hey, sorry, just looking out for you, Fox." "I'm plenty happy on my own, I can promise you that," I countered. "No, I get that." Sasha lowered her gaze. "Not all it's turned out to be. Just got me thinking is all." "Oh no. Struck out again?" Sasha shrugged, nodded, shrugged once more, fiddled with a V card. No eye contact. Ade reached out to take one of her paws in her own, black fur on tan, mismatched and complementary. Both had opted for mostly hand-like paws, but differences were evident on contact. Where Sasha's fur was an even, silky black marked by white stripes that were a little too sharp, a little too exact. Ade had labored to construct a version of himself as a fennec fox to exacting detail, down to the point where her muzzle couldn't even form the two letters that made up her name offline. Exacting, minus perhaps the two-leggedness, the hands, the humanity around the eye. Even then, I had an Av free of humanity stashed away somewhere. Thoughts of honing versus forging blurred their surroundings. Ade had honed himself to a finer and finer point while everyone else forged ahead. Always a way to be a better tech. Sorry, I keep getting calls and emails because the place I used to live is being evacuated because of forest fires. So if I keep clicking away, that is what I'm doing. Thoughts of honing versus forging blurred surroundings. Ade had honed himself to a finer and finer point while everyone else forged ahead. Always a way to be a better tech. Always a chance to become more Vulpine online. Always a way to become better at what one already was. To become more the Ade felt he was. Still running sound, still honing that skill. A shook her head to dislodge the rumination. I'm sorry, Sasha. Sasha shrugged again, as though she might be able to drop the very idea of bad breakups like an overloaded backpack. She gave the fox's paws a squeeze in her own. Men are ticks. I'd take a fox like you over some dickhead guy any day. Ade smiled faintly, returned the squeeze. Sasha, you know it wouldn't. No, I know. I just wish there were more guys out there like you. When Ade stiffened in her seat and looked away toward the windows, Sasha splayed her ears and added quickly, Sorry, dear, I keep putting my foot in it, don't I? Sorry, no, you're fine. Ade grinned apologetically. I should get a thicker skin, maybe, stand up for myself. I spend night after night hiding in here, and even then can't seem to assert myself. I appreciate you trying, though. Sasha smiled cautiously and nodded. You came out like 15 years ago, Ade. I should still be doing better. Ade's turned to shrug. It's hard to ask for that, so always has been. I think that's what I meant earlier, that you haven't changed, despite all the ways that you have. You haven't done like the rest of us and grown up, gotten married, all that crap. You're still doing what you loved and did to do in school. Don't get me wrong, I miss it. Actual theater, not the school stuff. Seeing crazy shows with you on the weekends. Hell, doing crazy shows in uni doesn't pay the bills, though. You should come up and see us sometime. It'd be good to see you again, too. You know I want to, Sasha grinned. It didn't last. But yeah, you seem kind of frozen, kind of stuck, in a few ways, even though you're succeeding in others. Ade nodded, rumination hanging in a cloud around him. So many ways the world had moved on without him. After a moment, though, I sat up straighter. Oh, speaking of frozen. Debar? The fox nodded. No news yet. He's been trying to get in touch with the clinic, or wherever that's taking care of Cicero, but the family's been getting in the way. They're fielding everything. They always sort of supported the relationship on the surface, but never actually approved of them being together, I mean. What? Really? The fox shook her head, poking a claw at the table before rubbing the spot with a paw pad. The sim was hardly immersive enough to waste cycles on letting claw dent tabletop. That's unfortunate. Not all that surprising, I guess, given what Sis said about them. They at least confirmed that's what's happening, though. That's what these are, Sasha said, slipping the stack of V cards over to him. There's contact info for the family, and a few centers around there that work on implants, some hospitals. We're thinking those might be the types of places where he wound up. There's also a card dealing his last on information. Ade twisted the stack of cards around in front of him, leafing through slowly and taking in a few of the details that slid across her fingertips. Mind if I make a copy? Go ahead. It's a deck Debar and I have been working on. Not complete, but I'll give you ACLs. Debar looked crushed. Is he doing all right? Sasha hesitated for a moment, caught in the middle of a gesture to grant copy rights on the cards. She shook her head, to which Ade could only frown. She finished the gesture, and another set of V cards shuffled itself out from the original stack, crisp black embossed on the creamy cotton paper that Ade preferred. I'll take a look, too. I can't do much right now. I know, you've got a show coming up, Sasha laughed. Don't worry about it, dear. DeBar's working on it. I'm taking a look while I can. And I'm sure the Weasel's got others helping him out besides us. No reason not to either. We all liked Cicero. Oh gosh, I lost my spot again. The two sat in silence. Ade slid Sasha's deck back and fanned airs out in front of himself. Before shuffling them back into a stack and swiping above them, instructing her rig to make a local copy of the deck. They lifted her snout away from the silence to scan the scents in the room once more. Now that it was starting to get on in the evening, even in the Americas, the scentscape was changing. Some familiar scents, some unfamiliar, but most of them at least detailed, which told Ade that the owners had put some thought into them. None, however, really jumped out at him. More rumination. Rumination edging into drowsiness. It's. Sorry about all the noise. The dogs are having a day. Hey, Sasha, I gotta get going. I know I just got here, but I'm starting to crash hard. The skunk nodded, tail drooping. No, it's all right. It's late there, and I know you've been in rehearsals for a while. Go get some sleep. Both stood up and exchanged another hug, Ade reveling in that dandelion scent of her friend. Memories of school, drowsy, dreamlike. Dandelions on the lawn, an impromptu picnic. Rubbing one of the flowers on the back of her hand, leaving a yellow stain. Sasha explaining the smell always reminded her of muffins. I'll see you later, skunk, yeah? Take care of yourself, okay? No working hard, slaving over a hot rig. Ade laughed and shook her head, gave the skunk one last squeeze before making her way back through the crowd to the alcove, already swiping her command palette into view to head home. I'll read one more section here, or one or two. Yoan Balan, 2305. Yoan Balan awoke to an urgent message. I didn't really like these, the sensorium messages. Much better to receive paper messages, letters, notes, missives, scrawled signatures, and careful handwriting. I mostly just liked paper, if it was honest. Always accruing paper, more pens. Paper messages, rich messages attached to paper that played on its surface, even ones that messed with the reader's sensorium. He sent them all. My friends found it perhaps a little disturbing, antiques from a world more physical than this. But to have one that just barged in on your vision, an endocrine system like this, made him anxious. This one included a tiny jolt of adrenaline as waking up to a zap of panic to have a partial sensory takeover felt rude. At least I didn't have to get out of bed to deal with it. The opacity on the message was turned up high so that even in her dark room, with her eyes closed and heart still pounding, I could see the fox. Bipedal, dressed sharply, it was sitting in a plain wooden chair situated in an empty room. The room had wood floors the same color as the chair, something light, maple or pine. The walls were concrete where they weren't glass. Outside the glass was a sere, short-grass prairie, a cloudy day. The combination of the fox's white fur, glistening and iridescent, combined with the room and landscape was almost painfully postmodern. He didn't think himself much a homophobe, but this was intense, to say the least. Hi, Mixbalon, the fox was saying. It seemed to speak in italics, though how, Yoan couldn't say. A sense. I have a proposition for you. Yoan grunted. The message was simplex, thank goodness, one way, no interaction required. My name is Deer, also the tree that was felled, or just Deer, and I am a member of the Ode Clade. I am an artist, the word seemed to come with a tone of distaste, and performer. I am not just telling you this to toot my own horn, I believe the phrase is, but to underline the fact that I am woefully unprepared for the situation at hand. The fox smiled, looking tired, and continued. I need some help finding someone. Someone that does not want to be found. It is personally important, but also potentially damaging to the image of our entire clade. Yoan furrowed her brow. This person has information, a name that they have supposedly shared. just go lay down. Okay. Sorry, dogs. This person has information, a name that they have supposedly shared. We, the other members of my clade and myself, do not precisely know if they actually did. Unfortunately, we just have word from some Perry system notification that someone said the name. Yoan could hear the capital letter. I am sorry. I am getting sidetracked by details. The fox shook its head, ears flopping from side to side. I try to be prepared for conversations and messages like this, but I am a little worked up. Excited, I guess. Can we meet? It listed an address. Even if only to talk. Even if you are not interested, I would still like to meet you. You seem neat. The message ended. Yoan lay in bed, thinking. It was still an hour before I had to get up, and I was loth to start the day before I had to. I tried her best to sleep for another 10 minutes at least, but her mind kept slipping back to Deer's request. Why me? I asked the backs of her closed eyelids. Why hire a writer who fancies himself What? A private investigator? I spent a few minutes researching the public basics on deer. Pronouns, it, its, species, fennec fox, age, go lay down. I'm sorry, so many dogs. Pronouns, it, its, species, fennec fox, age, old. The old clade was an early adopter. Some of its art. Really out there stuff, no further hints as to why it would need M in particular. Something on the markets piqued its interest, perhaps? With still half an hour before our alarm, Johan stretched out of bed. The least they could do was get a shower and some coffee. If there were any reason that the founders of the system had included full sensoria in the works, it must have been for those. Thus done and closed on, they knew he could never out-natty the fox, so the usual faux academia garb it was. They penned Dear a short note with a time. If it was day there in the sim, or even late afternoon, it should be the note before dinner or bed. Besides, they thought, maybe it will get the fox to stop using sensorium messages. No luck. Less than 30 seconds later, Johan received a sensorium ping of acknowledgement, a shiver up her spine for her trouble. He forked and sent the copy of himself, tag C1494BF, out to the meeting. Meanwhile, he'd get some food, perhaps work on her current project. R.J. Brewster, 2112. R.J. slid her hands from the cradles and leaned back from the headrest, letting out a full-fledged yawn, pent up from the interferites preventing it. The sound and motion startled Priscilla from across the room. He levered himself up out of her seat and trudged over to the still purring cat, stroking over her ears while she bunted her head up against her hand. Come here. Her mind foundered in a slurry of work, of Cicero's disappearance, of school with Sasha, of honing and forging. Sorry about that. I'm wiped, Prissa informed the cat. She purred louder. Smiling, he peeled her shirt off over her head and slipped out of her jeans. Tomorrow's rehearsal would mean full dress for everyone and makeup for the actors. He'd have to make sure her tux was clean. Should I iron it? Maybe I should iron it. Later. For now, as it neared 2, he focused on making sure the door was locked and the lights were out before stumbling over to bed. He flipped the screen down on her rig and sent it to sleep and wandered over to the mattress. There seemed to be no shaking Sasha and all of her talk from high school. Gone this last decade now, out of her head. Even as I climbed into the narrow mattress and burrowed beneath the covers against the chill of the night, I was replaying memories from school, scenes from America, a worn-out film, dim and scattershot. Come here, Falcon. Come here. Down. I apologize. Honing and forging. A and Sasha had tried dating early on. After a few weeks of it not going anywhere, they had both admitted that they felt pressured into having a relationship rather than actually wanting one. Good boys and girls fall in love with each other. Good boys and girls, right? Went out to the movies, kissed beneath the bleachers or something, pretended that they didn't have sex. A relationship petered out rather than ending in some climactic fashion. I will probably stop after this because the dogs are having... The relationship petered out rather than ending in some climactic fashion. They had continued the trend of going to the movies, and later live performances. They had never lost touch, at least. Sasha had gone on to have a string of other relationships, some earnest and some not, some more intense than others, a string that remained unbroken if tonight's conversation was. But RJ had stopped there. The intensity of the social pressure to date throughout high school was equaled only by RJ's complete apathy toward the whole scene. Apathy or often antipathy. He'd felt the occasional twinge of romantic attraction, perhaps, but the expectation of sex that went along with it, and the process so put him off that he had instead buried himself in work. He did well in some courses and not in others, as any kid might, but the subjects they enjoyed, it dumped all of their effort. Huge gusts of energy that drove him forward. He had started early on working the school's old They ran plays, they ran concerts, they ran assemblies and lectures, quickly earning the trust of the tech crew as well as the staff. And then it gained leadership, prestige. The various computer classes had captivated him as well, and for her 16th birthday, her parents had surprised him with the implants needed for full interfacing with the rig. Or, well, surprised. Her father was an engineer, and her mother a fairly forward-thinking person, and they had promised the procedure before university. Honing and forging, honing and forging. It was a straightforward procedure in an outpatient office. Self-guided implants largely installed themselves. The worst had been the itching. It was bearable on her hands and along her spine where the implants and cortex had breached the surface of her skin, because at least there they could scratch, though they had been cautioned not to. The NFC tags in her forehead and the interferates embedded deeper, far, far deeper, led to an itch that no scratching would ever reach. It had been fun, of course. Oh. From there, the sound in the rig had taken up all of their energy, leaving little time to worry about any social stigma that went along with an aversion to romance. It was simply the nerdy sound kid who knew more about computers than the teachers. It hadn't always been fun, of course, but by then A quickly learned that the more A put into the task, the more A got out of it. The more they honed, the further they went. That A had found Furry in high school seemed almost a natural progression. Working and improving at the art of interfacing in a way that felt natural to him, it seemed, came just as natural to others on the net. He moved effortlessly through the Crown Pub and a few other choice spaces, slowly crafting the primary persona A used when interacting with others. A fennec, Ade, a corruption of her chosen name, a corruption born of the intricacies of a thoroughly vulpine muzzle. A persona honed to a fine point. It was then that A and Sasha had really started connecting, for it was her that had introduced him to the community. They started hanging out more, talking more, building a network of friends together. Where dating hadn't worked, friendship grew in both breadth and depth. Honing and forging. Honing and forging. The forging of a virtual theater environment culminated in a scholarship at a big-name university out on the East Coast. Immersive interactive theater technology, they called it. Forging into honing. It meant leaving Sasha and a few other close friends behind, along with her family. But it also meant that they would be on the forefront of a new tech, something used in production, films, and live work both. The field had been so new that our own studies at the university helped fuel the change in theater tech work. Her dissertation was meant to be a simple capstone project, was published and distributed, and theaters around the world were suddenly using immersive tech. I had continued to work at the university for a while. It was one of the few places around with both a theater and the hardware to back it up. I had considered continuing our studies, but the draw of the theater was too heady, too alluring. Academia spelled a life of forging, work one of honing. Why deny one's base nature? Honing and forging, honing and forging. The call from London had come less than a year after I graduated. Would I like to help start a tech-savvy theater group in town? The pay would be slow to start, but the troupe had a loose collection of apartments in the East End. I would have full run of the sound department. Yes, when could I start? Our parents had needed convincing. They were pleased, to be sure, but London, so far away. Still in the Western Federation, but so far. I made her promises they'd come home to visit every year and packed our bags. Burying himself deeper in the covers and the mattress, leaving enough room for Priscilla to join him later, RJ's thoughts alighted finally on Cicero, on the lost. Losing Cicero had been a shock. A disappearance at first, last seen 2 days ago. 3. And then it went on. DeBar hollering one night after getting in touch with Sis's family. Lost, lost, he was lost. And getting lost was rare, vanishingly so, with perhaps a few hundred cases at the time. Still, among those who were counted among the lost, all were heavy interfacers. It was a risk, everyone had assumed, just as travel. Call it occupational hazard. Something could always happen. Something could always go wrong. To lose someone so close, though, that hit hard. It was a sharp reminder of just how much I relied on the integration, not only for work, but for the lion's share of her social life. I enjoyed the company of the troupe just fine. Troupe pub trips were a weekly affair, but her heart lay among her friends on the net. Her friends being on the net meant more interfacing, and more interfacing, it seemed, meant more risk. Perhaps more for M than any of her friends. Airtech was truly immersive, after all. It was a dissolution of the body, disembodied in the truest sense. It was becoming the room. It was a new sensory experience. No limbs, no torso, no face or eyes or ears. Or maybe all ears. It became the room, feeling the way the sound echoed or didn't, knowing the limits of the speakers in a deeply physical way. Mics peppering the walls, a new sensory the wires, nerves, the speaker's muscles to flex, instincts, reactions, and actions corresponding to a whole system of stimuli. Perhaps that was why it felt so at risk. They all were, of course, but to dissolve one's concept of a body work, and then come home and warp the very same concept into that of a fox. No, a finely wrought amalgam of fox and self felt perilously close to being lost sometimes. Honing and forging, risk and reward. They slept. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop there because I think the dogs are getting antsy and it's distracting me from reading. But I am going to turn off the camera. Oh, turn on the camera to stop streaming. And yeah, let me pull up the stream chat. Cool. Yeah, so this is a something I'm really proud of, really excited about. I've written a bunch before, but it's almost all been short stories. So it's been exciting to kind of branch out into writing novels, even if they're fairly short. This one's 60,000 some odd words, but this one also includes another novella in along with it in the same book, Gallery Exhibition, which is actually an adaptation of a Twine game that I wrote a while back. It is it involves the character Deer, also the tree who was felled, who was mentioned in one of the chapters, and sort of goes a little deeper into what it means to live in a world where you can create a copy of yourself. If you're uploaded and the system can support it, why not create a copy of yourself or fork? So Deer, being the slightly deranged fox that it is really into using that for sort of performance art. The process of writing it was interesting. I probably started originally way back in like 2016, and then put it up basically until, or towards the end of 2016, I put it up until basically this year when I lost my job and suddenly found myself with a lot of free time. So yeah, feel free to ask some questions. It sounds like the dogs have calmed down. I can read a little bit more, but I did promise some free books. So let me make sure I still have those. And I will have 2 copies of the paperback for free and a couple copies of the ebook for free. Assuming my store page will load. Nope, that's not what I wanted. But yeah, until then, I am happy to answer some questions if y'all have some. I would once again like to thank Iris J for such an amazing cover. I think a lot of sort of really intense colors, which I think works out really well for the topic, as the idea of reality online being somewhat closer to a dream is, something that plays a big role. And so having this sort of saturated in some aspects and undersaturated in others view of the world is really helpful. Okay, coupons. This thing is so slow. Okay, so I have two coupons for free paperbacks. So I'm going to drop this in Twitch chat. So that is the URL where you can pick this book up. It's got some links to both paperback and ebook. If you want to grab a free copy, the coupon codes are Dear and Serene. So one each for paperbacks, and then there's a couple each free books. So I think there's like four free copies of the ebooks. And then because a lot of this writing was supported by my lovely patrons, for which I'm eternally thankful. The all of Qoheleth, the novella Qoheleth, plus the Twine version of Gallery Exhibition are available for free to read online. There is a link on that Qoheleth.makio.inc that I dropped in stream chat to read it for free. It's got some ads in it, but if you missed the sale and still want to give it a go, but are running short on cash, there is a free to read version that runs in the browser. So yeah, I think that's about all I have, unless there's any questions. I can read more. I can compliment you all on your fine choice in writers guilds. I can show you the dogs. But maybe I will read one more chapter. Find it. Hey, somebody ordered. Okay. I will read one more chapter, which is another little bit from Yoan and Dear, so you get a little bit more of a view of that second story thread. It's not worth worrying about the screen sharing. Okay, so Yoan Balan, 2305. Yoan, tag C1494BF, found himself 20 meters in front of a squat, flat house. It was as modern on the outside as it had appeared on the inside. A concrete block, a thick wraparound patio bordered by dandelions and covered by cantilevered eaves, floor-to-ceiling grass for walls. It wouldn't be surprised if on the far side of the building, I couldn't see it very well with the slope of the prairie it was huddled on, jutted out at some crazy angle. Smiling ruefully, it walked up toward the house. It had her own aesthetic. I knew the trappings. Might as well own it. A soft tone, a vibraphone struck with a soft mallet, sounded both inside and outside the house as soon as they'd passed the barrier between grass and patio. I stood on the concrete, waiting to be either admitted or greeted. A shadow of a person, human, peeked out through the glass at him and gave him a pleasant wave and hollered out through the glass, "Yoan, hi, I'll grab Dear." Before the person could do so, Dear came padding around the side of the house, looking slightly more collected than it had during the message. "Yoan," it said, smiling and offering a hand. "Paw?" in greeting. Yoan wasn't sure how I knew when a fox was smiling, but it was definitely a smile. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Sorry for the urgent message. I just need to find someone to help out rather soon." Yoan C1494BF took the offered hand/paw and bowed. "Of course, dear." How strange it was to call someone a term of endearment as a name. "May we have a seat? I've just woken up and am still figuring out how to stand." Deer grinned and nodded, gesturing cordially with its paw around the side of the building from whence it had come, leading the writer around and through a door in the glass. The interior of the house was much as they had seen, though as they moved through the space where the first message had been recorded, a gallery, Yoan noticed, and deeper into the house, things warmed up a little. The concrete walls were softened by hangings and the furniture unexpectedly plush, none of the firm cushioned, straight-lined variety it had expected. Fox and writer settled on an L-shaped couch facing each other across the bend. After a moment's hesitation, Yoan began, "I must apologize, dear. I'm not sure that you have quite the right person. I'm not really a detective, wouldn't know the first way of finding the one you spoke of." Deer shook its head. No, I'm pretty sure you are the right person. My search of the markets is quite specific, and you topped all of the lists. I am not really looking for a detective per se, though there's plenty of those in the Oudclade. They will suss out the whens and wheres. Then what? There are a few types of people in the world, Yoan, the fox said, voice low and calm, low enough and calm enough to take out the sting of the interruption. There are forgers and honers. Most are familiar with those. Forgers build a thing and plow ahead, while honers settle on a thing and perfect it. Artists generally fall into these two classes, and they map to two outcomes in particular: prolific and unfruitful artists, respectively. But you are not an artist. You write, yes, but that is ancillary to what you do, a side effect. After all, there are some other types of people out there, too: catalogers, feelers, experiencers. Deer shrugged. For its own reason, the clade needs. I need someone to experience this along with us. Someone specifically outclayed. There's a lot of history in this, and a lot we have forgotten before uploading. Oh gosh. A lot we have forgotten before uploading. A lot that we're trying to remember, and maybe even some that we're trying to forget. I want you to help figure out the history of this, yes, but I also want you to experience it, and tell a coherent story after. An amanuensis, Johan said. Deer brightened, its ears perking. Precisely, and what a delightful word, too. Oops. Johan smiled. That's good, then. Very much in my arena. I'll keep this instance around and keep my tracker up to date. The fox nodded, then looked up, smiling as the person Johan had first seen came in with 3 thick-walled, wide-brimmed mugs of coffee, setting 2 of them down on the corner of the table near Johan and the fox. Johan, nice to meet you. Heard you were tired, they said, and walked off with their own mug. Deer watched them go. Your partner? Johan asked. A moment of chit-chat felt necessary. He lifted her mug carefully. It smelled quite good. The fox nodded and picked up its own mug, and leaned back into the cushions of the couch. Finally decided to explore relationships again, it said. They accuse me of treating it like an art project. Johan grinned. Well, are you a forger or a honer of relationships? Deer rolled its eyes, said, Touché. I'm trying to be a honer with this one. I gave relationships a miss after, well, some stuff before uploading. Before a long while, I forked to create lasting relationships rather than holding any of my own. Gets lonely, though. It was like being turned down every time, at least from this instance's point of view. Yowen felt they were drifting a little too deep for having just met, so I steered the conversation along a tangent. You fork quite often, then? Yes, dispersionista through and through. Or perhaps profligate tracker. Sometimes I do not have the option to let instances linger. Something seemed to occur to it, and the fox sat up straighter again. Speaking of, do you know much about the Oudclade? Yowen shook her head, sipped her coffee. It was good. It is an old clade, one of the oldest in the system. Our root instance, Michelle Hadja, uploaded basically as soon as she could, and quickly became one of the loudest voices in the system. She campaigned for a more advanced sensoria to be included. I've heard of Michelle, Yowen nodded, usually in the context of the founders. You speak of her like she's someone else. Dispersionista have it. We are quite different from each other by this point. If you get the chance to meet Michelle, and you may, you will see the differences. So, what is Ode then? Her old username? No, an ode is a poem, Deer laughed. Oh, of course. So Michelle wrote this poem? No, actually. Michelle had a friend, a good friend, who wrote the poem. Deer was speaking more slowly now, sounding less rehearsed. When the friend died, Michelle memorized the poem. All of us Uptree instances do our best to keep it memorized as well. Really memorized too, up in the forefront, up where we think about it, not stored in some exocortex. Is that where your names come from? Yes, each of us is named after a line in the poem. I am Deer, also the tree that was felled. In my first long-lived fork is, which offered heat and warmth through fire. My immediate down tree fork is Deer the wheat and rye under the stars. Deer splayed its ears, grinning sheepishly. It is perhaps not a very good poem. Michelle was, well, she had some experience relating to the Origins of the poem I shall not get into here, but which even she will admit. The sentiments are nice, but this friend was not a poet. When they died, when they killed themselves, it really tore her. We still think of them often. Yoan nodded, once more steering the conversation away from more sensitive topics. It must be quite long, then. 100 lines divided into 10 stanzas. There are only ever 10 branches as direct ancestors of Michelle, and each branch only ever has 10 long-lived up-tree instances. We may be dispersionistas, but we are a small clade. And the poet? Who are they? Deer bristled, then mastered some complex set of emotions Yoan didn't understand. That is the name that we do not share. The information that someone supposedly did share, I mean. Someone of the clade, or someone close enough to know. Yoan's brow furrowed, startled by the fox's intense reaction. Not to mention the concept of not sharing a name that was clearly important. I see, I said to her coffee, covering her confusion. So you'd like me to help in finding this person and act as an amanuensis along the way? Nodding, Deer held out its paw once more. If you would be willing, that is, we would be glad to have you on board. It was already sold, Yoan knew, but all the same, it took a moment longer to consider the ramifications of the job. Excuse me. I couldn't come up with any reason not to. I nodded, reached out, and shook the fox's paw. Deer grinned. Excellent. I have shared about all that I care to share on right now, though as we get updates, I will pass them on to you. Deer leaned back into the couch once more, lapped at its coffee. For now, stay. Finish your coffee at least, though feel free to putter around for or just stay here. We have an apartment on the side of the house. I have already talked with my partner about it. Yoan nodded. Thank you. I think I'll head home in a bit and sync up with myself, then start the research plan. Do you have any suggested avenues I should start down? Of course, Deer smiled. As for research, dig a bit more into the Ode Clade for now. Probably. When I send you updates, maybe those will lead to different topics. The smile turned into a sly grin. I know you are not a big fan of sensorium messages, but as that is how the clade communicates, those of us who do, at least, I regret to say you will be getting quite a bit more. Yoan gave her best polite smile. And I will cut it off there. But yeah, thank you all for... wow. Looks like something happened in chat there. Thank you all for peeking in. Yes, all physical books that you order from me are signed. Painted Ava. They, that's for any book that you buy from me personally. I have like 2 minutes here to how do you find the process of writing a novel, even a short one, different from writing short stories? Nanikiri asks. I found that I wandered a lot. It was harder for me to stick to an outline with a novel than a short story. I can show you quick what that looks like. I'm going to share my screen super quick, and then I will probably duck off. But yes, the process of writing a novel was very much one of like struggling to stay on task, and managing the outline through scenes helped me out quite a bit, because I would give myself an act structure. This one is essentially 4 acts, or 3 acts in a longer denouement. And that helped me stay on topic a little bit better. But it was much more difficult to make sure that I stayed on topic as I was supposed to. But again, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to hand it over to Linnea and her delightful reading from her delightful book that I really enjoyed. So thank you. 2020 has been terrible, so courage and be kind.